This is the same photo printed with the same printer on two different types of paper, both made by the same manufacturer. On the left, we have a matte finish print. On the right, glossy. Clearly one is richer, punchier, more vivid. Many would say, better. But why? Why do matte finish prints always look so flat compared to glossy? Well, the difference is most evident in the dark tones. So to explain this, we'll be looking at two photos that have plenty of those. They come from my last video where I took you on location for the Chapman Avenue project. Although I didn't actually show you these pictures in that video, I just kind of teased them towards the end with the little behind the scenes footage. You'll be seeing them here. And one you just saw. This absolute unit of a rooster overlooking his kingdom from atop Taqueria Nuevo Perico number 2. Número 2. Which means the new parakeet, by the way. So why a rooster, not a parakeet, atop this building? No sé. This was a scan from Kodak Portra 160 shot in the Mamiya RZ67. The second photo is a 6x17 shot on Portra 800. You can see I got a beautiful sunset on this evening, also a single car in the parking lot and one dude standing out front, which happens to be exactly the right number of cars and humans for one of my photos. Later on in this video, I'm going to be printing this image real big, and I'll tell you how you can see a bonus video where I talk all about soft proofing, hard proofing, and converting the image to the proper ICC profile for printing. This whole matte prints looking washed out thing, it's not a limitation of printer technology, it's physics. And you can see the effect in all sorts of everyday objects. If I hose down my fence, the rich redwood tones spring to life. If I wet these rocks, they instantly go from drab to stunner. And if my dog drools on the driveway, the concrete erupts with breathtaking depth and clarity. Yuck. But it's not just water and Wyatt spit, it's really anything that makes a surface glossy. If I paint this rock with a glossy clear coat, you'll see it too takes on the richness of a wet rock. And perhaps the most pertinent example for our purposes, this matte black paint from Rust-Oleum dries much lighter than its gloss black equivalent. So whether it's glossy from water, drool, a spray-on clear coat, or a glass smooth resin coating on a piece of paper, the enhanced contrast is a result of the same phenomenon. So what's really going on here? Why are wet rocks so much prettier? Why is wet concrete so much darker? And for the love of God, why can't I get my matte blacks to look as deep and rich as my gloss blacks? Well, if we ask Google AI, it's just an illusion that gloss black only appears darker because the bright reflections off the smooth surface simply make the dark areas seem even darker. So according to AI, it's all in my head, which is exactly what a robot would say. But that reason doesn't hold up to a simple experiment. Under absolutely controlled conditions, I can use a reflected light meter to see just how much light is reflecting off of the shadows and highlights. On the matte finish print, this shadow reads 4.7 stops darker than the white border. On the gloss print, that shadow is 5.9 stops darker. So that rules out the whole dark areas only seem darker theory. Hit the bricks, Google AI! Take your stupid multicolored letters with you. To understand what's really going on here, we must first understand two things. One, glossy prints are smooth, while matte prints are textured. Yes, it's very fine and it may not seem textured to us, but that's precisely what makes it matte instead of glossy, is there is a very, very fine texture to the surface. And two, when you're looking at a print, you're actually looking at a mix of surface and subsurface reflections. Surface reflections are what they sound like, but subsurface reflections come from light that penetrates the surface of your print, bounces around off the inks, and then pops back out to meet your eye. This is really where the color and tone comes from in your print. You get both types of reflections in both types of prints, but what really separates these two is how they affect the surface reflections. The rough surface of a matte print scatters the surface reflection in many directions, while the smooth surface of a gloss print consolidates the surface reflection into a single direction. So when viewing a gloss print, as long as you're not in the direct line of that light reflecting off the surface, you'll have a clear view of the subsurface reflections underneath. So we see rich pigments in all their glory. But as soon as you move into the line of that reflection, well, those dark tones sure don't look rich from this angle. When viewing the matte print, on the other hand, the surface reflection is getting scattered in many directions. Now the upside is that means you can view the print from just about any angle and it won't look any different. Because the light is getting reflected in many directions, you can view the print from many directions and it looks no different. No change in brightness, no white hot reflections coming in to block your beautiful photo. The downside of this scattering is it can kind of drown out the subsurface reflections. So that beautifully colored light re-emerging from the subsurface has to mix with the scattered white surface light before it reaches your eye. This dilutes the color and washes out the dark tones. Now there is an additional effect that could be happening here, where some of the subsurface reflections actually get reflected back down into the material when they bounce off the underside of the glossy surface. Less light leaves, tones look darker. And in the case of the wood fence at least, it may be more a result of water's index of refraction causing light to scatter deeper into the material, increasing how much of it is absorbed versus reflected, but I ain't Veritasium over here, so I'm just gonna leave that alone. Now on the prints at least, the effect is most noticeable in the dark tones. And that's not an illusion. It's actually affecting dark tones more than highlights. That's easily confirmed with a reflected light meter reading. So why would that be? Well, the explanation is pretty simple. As those subsurface reflections mix with the scattered white light reflecting on the matte surface, it's kind of like mixing in a dash of white paint with the original color. If it starts off as a deep, rich blue, adding that little bit of white is going to have a pretty noticeable impact. It's going to become a faded blue. But if you're adding a dash of white to a surface that's already white, what's that going to do? That's why this image doesn't really look any different on matte versus glossy. This image is all light tones, so there just aren't any dark tones to mix with the surface reflection. It's also why I can make a duplicate version of this matte print, soak it with water, then compare it to the uncoated version to see relatively unchanged highlights but much darker shadows. It also looks a hell of a lot like the glossy version. It's just much harder to frame. So you see, it's not the fault of the inks. It's just physics. In fact, my Canon Pro 1000 has two different black inks. Matte black and photo black. Matte black is formulated specifically to dry darker on matte finished papers. Only problem with it is it won't dry at all on gloss papers. That's why we still need photo black. So Canon's doing everything they can to make blacks look darker on matte finished papers. But Canon can't beat physics. Not even Rust-Oleum can. And don't go thinking it's the fault of the paper either. This $2.50 a sheet Hahnemühle matte Baryta fine art paper has no richer blacks than the 39-cent Canon matte. Matte black is matte black. It's always going to look soft no matter how expensive the paper is. So knowing all this, what paper do I typically print on? Because I'm sure that's what you're all clamoring to know. Well, for my limited edition prints, my paper of choice is Hahnemühle Photorag. It's matte as matte gets, and yet many of my photos have lots of very dark shadows. So then why do I never print on glossy paper? 5 reasons. 1, I hate reflections. What good are deep dark shadows if you can't see them through the reflection of your own stupid face? Under gallery lighting, sure, but hanging in the real world opposite those big beautiful windows? Good luck. And those reflections highlighting every ripple in the paper, it's going to have your bigger prints looking like the Drake Passage. 2, the softer black point of matte finished paper can be an asset, not a drawback. It just depends on how you look at it. The way I see it, high saturation, high contrast has been done. And I think it can kind of overwhelm a room. The softer look of a matte print, I think, looks better hanging on a wall. And can even be reminiscent of the color grading you'd find coming out of Hollywood, lending itself quite well to a cinematic look. If that's what you're going for. Which often I am. 3, the flat blacks are really only jarring when viewed next to an identical glossy version under directional lighting. But that really only happens in YouTube videos. In the more diffuse lighting of home and office, the difference between the two is greatly reduced. Plus, standing on its own, a matte Photorag print is gorgeous. The shadows don't look washed out at all. 4, glossy prints look like what they are. Cheap. Oh, shots fired. I get it. This one's a personal opinion and I mean not offend. But when I see a glossy print, I just can't help but think of the samples they leave out at the local office supply store to show how vivid the colors are on the new $80 HP printer. It's just not what I want to sell. Gloss Baryta prints are exempt from this though. They don't look cheap. That's because they're not cheap. Also exempt from this, gloss finish C-type prints. Those are the wet process prints you get done at a pro lab. Especially on something like Fuji Pearl. Even though it's got an ultra high gloss finish, man, it looks the opposite of cheap. What's the word? Anti-cheap. 5. Did I mention I hate reflections? It's like, illuminate my print, light, don't block it. And that brings us back to Hanshaw Liquor. I'm going to be printing this bad boy 3 foot wide. And I already high-res scanned the negative, color corrected, sharpened, resized, it's all ready to go. In fact, I did a pretty lengthy video tutorial on the proofing process, which is where I use soft proofing, hard proofing, and the proper ICC profile to make sure I'm getting the best possible color rendition and shadow detail when I go to translate this digital file to real-world paper. And the techniques apply equally to both home printing and lab printing. Now, I've been wanting to do something nice to say thank you to all my lovely voluntary contributors, because you guys are really keeping this channel afloat so I don't have to do Squarespace ads. That video is for you. So anyone who contributes $5 or more as a result of this YouTube video, so you got to use the link in the description of this video in particular, but $5 or more, you get instant access to that video. It's ad-free on my website, and you'll have lifetime access and all that good stuff. And I realize that's kind of making it so I'm just selling that video for $5. But give me a break. I'm trying to do something nice for the contributors, a little pseudo Patreon thing. And by the way, if you're already a monthly contributor, you don't need to make another contribution. You've done enough. I'll be reaching out to you directly for access to the video. So, I'm going to be printing this pretty big. The question now is, what paper should I use? Now, this has a lot of dark tones, which would certainly benefit from that richening effect caused by a glossy surface. But personally, when I look at this shot, I see a movie still. And I think it would actually benefit more from the softer black point of matte finish paper. Kind of give it more of that cinematic look. Also, did I tell you I hate reflections? Because I really freaking hate reflections. I opted for my trusty old Hahnemühle Photorag 308 GSM because I am nothing if not predictable. Acid-free, lignin-free, and made of 100% cotton, this paper, unlike my style, is highly resistant to aging. But because this print lacks the resin coating of a gloss paper, like my ego, it is a bit more fragile. Not to tearing necessarily, but to surface damage. Still talking about the paper. And Photorag never disappoints. This print looks, good. And hey, look, I can actually see it from every angle. Isn't that nice? My proofing procedure worked like a charm. No unpleasant surprises on the color or shadow detail. It is a bit grainy, but that's to be expected of Portrait 800. This is edition 1 of 25, and I truly, truly wish I could keep this, but I am plumb out of wall space. I'll throw it up on my website in case anyone wants to snatch up the first edition. So going back to the title of this video, why do glossy prints look better? Well, they don't. Not to me anyway. But I needed a catchy title for this video. And I hope now too, at least you understand why they look different. But really, this is the joy of printing, my friends. The paper you choose is yet another way that we can express ourselves creatively. So, whatever your preference, I encourage you, just get some of your pictures on paper. I promise you won't regret it. And if you're pulling your hair out trying to get your matte finish prints to look as rich and contrasty as your glossies, just remember, it's not possible.